Hello, my name is Professor John Benjamin. This is West Virginia Wesleyan College, and this is Graphic Design 1. Today, this is part 2 of magazine layout design. So here we are with what we worked on last time. So now, this time, we're going to work on captions and images and pull quotes. Right, so let's begin with images and captions. So one of the things I like to do at this point, if I zoom out, we can see that we have 3 pages that we need to fill. So at this point, looking back at our flat plan, I might have a half-page vertical ad that can go here or here. And that's really the end of it. That fills up all of this space. In this case, we've got 2 images that came with the article from the author. And so we do need to use them. We're not going to put an ad here. So we're just dealing with this copy volume and these 2 images. So let's just take a look. We're just going to test out. I'm going to just duplicate this. I'm going to option drag Cicero here. And I'm just going to see how much room Cicero takes up. Now looking at my grid, I probably am going to want to try to conform Cicero to my grid. So he takes up that much room. I don't think he's going to take up 2 boxes. Crop him up like so and center him. Now that's fine. He could, but this seems like a lot of extra information that's not necessary. So I could use 2 boxes for that, but most likely what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to conform Cicero's photo here and there. And that's all we really need to know. We just want to look at his face. Like, here's Cicero. Here's the bust. I don't need to know all the other information. But that's a decision I get to make as the designer. Well, he's going to take up 1/12 of the page, where my copy is taking up 3/12. So I'm left with 8/12 left over. So I've got this pretty large image here. Let's see how much room this is going to take up. So it could take up as much as 6 boxes, like so. But I'm not going to make that decision because of the lack of importance. This particular photo doesn't have any critical importance to this article. It's just sort of a reference to typesetting in the Renaissance period when this was first used. So it's giving the reader kind of an idea of the time period and what typesetting looked like. But they don't need this image to really understand the article. Now, more informative images that are critical, we can make really large based on their importance. But this one's not that important, so I don't want it to take up a full half page. And the other thing that I can do is I can crop a lot of this image out because it's just basically a reference. There's no critical parts of this image that are critical to understanding the content. So I can go ahead and crop in a little bit more and conform it to 4/12. And so there I have that much, and I can switch these out. And so I can do a quick assessment left. I've got 4/12 left to fill up. And there's a lot of different ways that I can do this. But one way is I could use a pull quote. And so I could go ahead and create a text box. And give it a wrap. And that's going to push my text. So now I've got 2 images, and I'm going to put a pull quote in there. But I've still got 2/12 left in this page to fill up. That would be super awkward if the article just ended there with this white space. So we don't want to do that. So one of the things I can do is I've got this area in the title page of the article that I can play with a little bit. And there's lots of flexibility in this page here. And so maybe what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and hit Command B. And I'm going to change, that's text frame options, the number of columns from 3 to 2. And then I'm going to slide this text box, this text frame, over so then those 2 columns can form. So now I've got a lot more space to work with. And if I move Cicero here in this article, you can see I've filled up this area pretty good. To really get a sense of it, I can go ahead and just put a temporary wrap on this image. You can see it pushes it to there. I can put Cicero right there. And now I've got everything filled out. We have our title page, this page is filled, and then this page is filled as well. So I'm just testing things. You get a rough idea in your flat plan how this page is going to be laid out, but you don't know until you really get in there how the type and the copy is going to all flow together. All right, so now I'm just going to go ahead and put these back where they were, remove the wrap, and get rid of this text box. I don't need it. And then we're going to I think I'll leave this Cicero like this. And then we're actually going to put them into the page. Okay, so let's start with Cicero. We're going to give Cicero a caption. How do we do that? Here's the caption that it came with. Now, sometimes, on a rare occasion, you have to put in your own caption. And quite often, though, you do have to add extra text, like photo by or photo with permission by, things like that, of that nature. So, but we have a caption that came with this photo. So I'm going to select the photo, go to Object, and Captions. I get three options: Caption Setup, Generate Live Captions, or Static. Typically, I choose Static. What happens is, if I choose Caption Static Caption, it just gives me a little caption, and it uses as a placeholder the name of the file. Now, what's wonderful, if you do live captions, that name of the file will change when you change the file name, which is really helpful if you're working on a team and someone changes the name of the file, then that updates the caption. So you can have really detailed captions in the image file name, and then someone else can update that for you. Or you can. It's a nice, flexible way. But typically when you're working alone, just a static caption is fine. And that's just a little bit of a placeholder. All right, but before we do that, we need to set up some parameters. So I'm going to undo that, Command-Z, go back to my image, select the image again, Object and Captions, in Captions Setup. Oops. So we have some options. All of your captions might have the same pattern of text, like photo by or photo with permission, or maybe, and you can put that text before or after if it's on every photo. So you can do this. You can put in some metadata as well and add different levels. So, but here is the more important part, I think, and that's the position. So typically, I'd like my captions to be just below the image, but you could choose to go above, left, or right. And then there's the offset amount. Now, I'm going to use the wrapping on my image to offset, so I'm not going to set that. I like to group them together, so I'm going to check that. And then lastly, our captions need a style, and here's a good, you can set it up earlier in your paragraph styles, but here's a good opportunity to do that. So there's no style, so I'm going to select the down arrow and go to New Paragraph Style. All right, and I'm going to call this Captions. And typically for captions, you want them to be different from your body text. So I have Adobe Caslon Pro, a serif typeface, that's 10 points. So I want my captions probably to be smaller, maybe bold, and in a sans serif typeface. That way they're definitely contrasting to the body text so the reader doesn't confuse them with the running text. So let's go ahead and do that. I've been using Azo as my sans serif. You can use whatever you like. I'm going to go Azo bold and 8 points. I'm also going to create near solid leading, just tighter leading, and then no hyphenation. So remember, small groups of text like titles or captions or headings that quite often are sans serif should not have hyphens. You don't want to break the words. It becomes harder to read, where hyphens help reading for running text. Okay, so no hyphenations, and hit OK. Great, and I'm all set there. I'm going to hit OK. So now, when I select my image, I select Object and Captions, Generate Static Caption. There it is. It's all nice, and the style is applied. But here's my real caption. Now, I'm going to select this text, and there's different ways that you can apply styles. I can go to my Properties panel and select it here, Caption. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this with my text tool, my type tool, then go to my highlighter tool and simply click on that text. And that applies whatever styles are applied to this text are now applied to this text. So it's a very handy little tool. Then I'm going to simply go ahead and cut that, Command X, all text I think on the PC, and paste that in there. And then I can delete this box. Okay, great. There's my image with its caption. They're grouped together, you can tell by the dotted line. But I've got an angry output here. And that means that there's text that didn't fit into this tiny box. So we're going to use the fitting option to make it just fit really nice and tightly. So what I like to do is go to my direct selection tool, my arrow, just select that box. And then you can go to Object and Fitting. Now there's lots of fitting objects. They're mostly applied to images. But in this case, I'm only getting the one object. I want to fit the frame to the content. Make the frame bigger to fit the text. And that's also Option Command C. And then voila, there we have it, all nice and neat and tidy. All right, well, we're almost ready, but it's not going to work if I bring in this image and this caption together because it's just going to sit on top of the type and no one's going to read it. It needs a wrap. And so if it needs a wrap, and I'm going to have multiple images, I'm not just going to hit wrap. I'm just going to pull up the wrap palette here. That would only help me for one, but I have multiple images throughout this whole magazine, so I need an object style so they're all consistent. All right, so I'm going to select the image, and I'm going to go to my object style right here. You can pull that down in the Windows palette and make a new one. Double click. I'm going to call this image. I'll call it image 1 in case I had 2 variations. And then I'm just simply going to come down here to the text wrap. I'm going to wrap around the bounding box. I'm going to make it a full 1 pica. Remember, if you want this to all be linked, make sure that's linked. And that's all I need. Go ahead and hit OK. All right, now I have a wrap. That's very good. Something happened here because I gave a style that has a wrap. Both the image and the text box both have a wrap. So what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to select my text box here. You can see the wrap is pushing the text out. I'm going to select it, and then I'm just going to choose fitting again. Now I'm going to go the quick route and use the key commands, Option, Command, C. And then that pushes it down. And see, what I have here is now there's space between my image and the caption, a full pica, which I think is nice and neat. All right, one last bit. So now it's got a wrap. It will not sit over the type, so that's really good. So now the next thing I want to consider is putting this on a different layer, because a lot of times your images are going to get in the way when you just want to deal with your type by itself. So it's good to put these on separate layers. So I'm going to come to my layer palette, and I'm going to call this copy. This is my copy layer, or your text layer. And then I'm going to make a new layer. This is going to be images. You may have several layers, backgrounds, table of contents, ads, however you like to do it. But for now, we've got images and copy. So then I'm going to simply Command X, cut him from that layer, and Command V, and paste him into the images layer. So where does Cicero go? He should go at a very strategic place. Images should always follow the content that references them. They should never go before. That would be confusing. You're reading along, you see a picture of Cicero, but you haven't heard any mention of it. So you're like, what is this all about? So you want to be able to read about Cicero. Maybe you're curious of what he looks like, and then the image follows that. Even if the image has to go on the next page, that's more appropriate than having it on the page before, fitting all nicely, and then having the content be pushed to the next page. All right, so Cicero is first talked about down here, Marcus Tullius Cicero. So now what I'd perfectly like to have is that he's right here, but we can't see him then. See, it mentions it, and he follows it immediately. That'd be great. So he's got to come up here into the next page, and that seems like a perfect place. You read about Cicero here, and then you come up here, and you're like, oh, there he is. That's what he looked like. Excellent. All right, so now we've got this other image. So we're going to do the same thing. We have to make sure that this is the shape that we want, because if we group an image with our caption box, it's a little hard to change their shape, but I think this is pretty much the shape that I want. Okay, so select the image, object, captions, generate static caption. Great. Come down here. Again, you can apply the style to this text that was given to us, that imported with our Word document in many ways. I'm going to select it, use my eyedropper tool, and then select this text. And so those styles are all applied. And then I'm going to highlight and cut, triple click and paste. And there you have it. I don't need that box anymore. And they're grouped. And there they are. Excellent. So finally, then I'll need to add my wrapping, which I have a style for here, in my object styles, image 1. Great, same problem. This image pushed down my text. I simply select that box and Command Option C, and there you are. All right, so where do I put it? I want to put this where, or following, where it's mentioned in the text. And so this is where it's lorem ipsum was first used in typesetting. And so here, it's this bit here about this, a case of strange coincidence. Here is where the image is referenced. With Cicero's work as one of the most published works during that time, the typesetter would most likely have used an excerpt from Cicero's books. So we need that image to follow that text. Now it can't go down here right afterwards, so it's got to go somewhere else. Now I've chosen this space because this allows some balance on the page. If I hit W, we've got a little balance between Cicero and the typesetting. That's balancing out the page. But more importantly, it's allowing the text to flow very nice and freely. So I'm going to read top to bottom, left, right to left. So I'm moving over here, top to bottom, right to left, top to bottom, right to left, top to bottom. The flow is nice and even. Now, if the picture was here, which is a fine place, it's like a little checkerboard, the flow is interrupted. I'm reading down this column and I've got to move through the image to get to this column. That's not wrong. You're just going to make a strategic choice. How does it look best on the page, and how more or little is it disrupting the text flow? So in my case, I think this gives the page balance and has optimal text flow. Great. Now, oh, one last little bit here. Notice I could line up the image here and have the caption flow below the flow line. That's fine, except I'm going to create a folio with page numbers that's going to go down here. So I really need this text to be lined up with this baseline here. So I'm just going to move that up. So then that brings up the next question. Here is my grid line that I typically like to align to. This isn't wrong, but if I have an image over here that's lined up with this line, they'll flow better if they're aligned on the appropriate line. So you can just simply come in here, select it. I'm selecting it with my direct selection tool and just moving that down. That gives me a little more space to show more of the image, like so. There we have it. Great. So let's take a look at our copy volume and how things are balancing out. Okay, I've got 2 out of 12 squares, so 2/12 left to fill up. I think I can do that with a pull quote. But I also haven't addressed my intro paragraph. And so here I have the first paragraph. I want to draw attention to it so that when people come to read this article, they can get a quick understanding of what it's about. First, they see the title. Next, maybe they see some imagery. But here's just the beginning, the intro paragraph. I'm going to call that out so they can read that really quickly to decide is this something they're interested in, do they want to continue. So I'm going to highlight that, cut it, click drag out of box, paste. I need to make a new style for my intro sentence here, my intro paragraph. So first, in my object styles palette, I'm going to give it a wrap. It should be a different wrap. Your intro paragraph, text box, object style should be different from your other ones like your image, even if you use some of the same parameters. So I'm going to go ahead here, give it a 1 pica wrap. And it's going to need a paragraph style. Right now it's got paragraph style 1. So here I'm going to click on this and say new. And I need a paragraph style called intro. I don't want it to be Caslon because I wanted to contrast. So I'm going to go back to my sans serif, as those sans. I'm going to make it bold or medium. I'm going to make it quite a bit larger, not too large. Probably give it a little bit bigger than solid leading. And a color. I'm going to start with this blue. I'm sure I'll change it later. And okay, that's a little large. Go into my paragraph styles. Changing the intro paragraph style. Hold on, let's go 14. So I'll go 14, 16. And no hyphens. There we are. Alright, so I've got a wrapping box. And I'm going to sort of push this text into there so we know that they're integrated. Here's the introductory text. By pushing it in here, it says, okay, this is connected to this. Read this first. Hierarchically, it's larger, it appears first. And so there's my little intro paragraph. All right, let's see how that's doing with our copy. Okay, that didn't really help us. We still have 2, so that's where the pull quote's going to come in. Now, pull quotes, much like an image, it typically should follow the text. It doesn't necessarily have to, but it does have to be on the same page. You can't have the quote be on a previous page or the next page. You want the quote to be on that page. So the pull quote is sort of a little signal. This quote, if you're interested in it, is on this page, so you want to keep reading. And so the quote I'm going to use here is by Jesse Day, and this really has a very interesting. You want to pick something that's really interesting, that's going to sort of inspire inquiry from the reader. Like, well, that's interesting, but it should also be really appropriate too. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy that. I'm not going to cut it because we need that to still be in the copy. I'm going to go ahead and drag out a text box, paste that in there, And first thing I need to do is create contrast. I need to differentiate this text from here. So I have my intro text, which is differentiated, but that's not really the same. I want it to look different from my intro paragraph. I want my pull quote to be a little different. So I'm going to then, after I've applied that style, I can select the plus sign, create a new style that has all of those styles already to begin with. Like I want to start with that color. So we're going to call this pull quote. And I don't want it to be medium. I'd like it to be light and a little bigger. Let's go 20. And we'll do 22 leading. Make sure we don't have any hyphens. Good. That looks pretty nice. All right, one thing that I did forget though is it has an indent. Pull quotes do not require that. You can make a stylistic choice, but it's not required. All the signals are there to let you know it's a pull quote. It doesn't need to be indented. So I'm going to go back here and remove that indent. Great. All right, one last interesting issue here is called a hanging quote. So you can see quotation marks are very tiny and they leave a little space here before the letter. So it almost looks like it's a slight indent. It's an optical illusion that's created simply because the quotation marks are so small. So in these cases, what we can do is simply select the box, go to Type and Story, and then select Optical Margin Alignment. And you can change this to fit better however the typeface is. But you can see what's happened here is it's created an optical alignment. It's pushed the quotes out a little bit and P a little bit closer. Even though P isn't completely aligned there, it looks more balanced. It looks as though it is. It's an optical illusion, which we have to address many optical illusions as graphic designers, but particularly in typography. All right, so now let's give this an object style. It needs a wrap. So we'll go back to our object styles and call this pull quote. Again, every different instance should have its own style. Let's do text wrap, one pica all around. That should do it. Okay, let's try to put it somewhere. So if I put it right here in the main column, one of the problems that's going to happen is if it's aligned with this text here, people may get confused and think this is how you read it. Like you'll read DeLorean ipsum, and you'll think this is the next part of that paragraph. I mean, there's a strong signal that that's not the case, but sometimes we have to give the reader a little extra help. So what's a good plan is to simply space it between the gutters. So in this placement, the reader keeps on reading the flow of copy and then can choose when to go in and read this bit of copy on their own. So that's a good placement. Other placements are off to the side, like so. Any sort of little indicator that says it's not part of the running copy. Again, even though the color should tell you that, it just helps a little bit. Okay, so now we only have 1/12 of an area that's left undealt with. That's really not that big a deal. I think readers are not going to have much of an issue. It'd be great if we could push that down. I think we will. So let's address one last little issue that with a style sheet that might fill that space just a little bit. Okay, so here we have the reprinted with permission. All right, so I'm going to get rid of some of these styles by just using my eyedropper, and I need to separate this out. This is the way it reads now. This looks like this information is part of the article about Lorem Ipsum. It's not. This is a piece of copy that we put in here to say that this has been reprinted, and we have legal permission to do so from the author. So this is going to need to be called out. So we're going to give this another style. So I'm going to go to my paragraph styles here, create a new one, and this is going to be the permission. All right, one of the things I want to do is call it out. So I'm using a serif typeface, so I'm just simply going to use italics. And then I'm going to give it a little space before. It doesn't need an indent. I'm going to remove that. Space before, let's give it a 1 pica before. And I would like to give it a very, very clear indicator that it's not part of the regular text by giving it a rule. So select paragraph rule, say rule on, 1 pica looks, or 1 point looks good. Over here we have offset. If I increase the offset, you can see what's happening. It moves it above the text. So I want it to be right about there. Let's P11. Here, one pica is really pretty good. All right, I think I like the way that looks. I'm going to hit OK. This is part of that group, except hit turn. And lastly, because it's italicized, we want to italicize the name of the publication, which is Learning Hub. So, but if the text is already italicized, what do? We unitalicize. So I'm just going to come to my properties panel here in characters and just change just for that one word back to regular. All right, that feels pretty balanced. The last little thing that we can do to tell people this is the end of the article is insert an endnote. So the most common endnote, you can make any vector object an endnote, but I'm just going to show you the most common one. This is the one they use in the New Yorker. It's just a bullet. Well, option 8 gives you a bullet. That's Control 8, I think, no, Alt 8 on a PC. Now that's an end mark, but it's a bullet. It's a little common. We need something a little more unusual. So something like a diamond really works well. Now, different typefaces can have different glyphs that you can use for endnotes, or you can create your own. Well, let's take a look and see what Adobe Caslon Pro has for their glyphs. So let's take a look at the other characters that are in this typeface. To do that, we're going to go to Type and Glyphs. And then you can see here, you scroll down, these are all the other characters that are included with this typeface. It's an old typeface. We've got lots of little wood type ornaments and things in here. But if I wanted to, let's say I wanted this to be my endnote, which is like an hourglass, I would just double click on the glyph, and then it would show up there. And that could be your endnote. But again, in this case, I want to use a diamond. So I'm just going to draw a diamond. So I'm going to click outside of my text, and I'm just going to go create a rectangle here, like so. So I'm going to make a very tiny rectangle. I like it to be solid black. I'm going to go to my fill, make it black. I'm going to zoom in a little. And that's actually a really good endnote too, just a black square. But I'm going to rotate it 45 degrees just to make it a diamond. Great. And then to put that in your text, all you need to do is select it, hit copy, tap Command-C, and just put your cursor in your text and then hit Command-V. And there it is. I'm going to get rid of the hourglass. And that's called an endnote, and that goes at the end of every article. And it's just a beautiful little signal that says, you don't have to read on. This isn't going to continue on. That's the end of the article. All right, things are looking pretty good. Let's take a look around here. It's pretty balanced. The copy's filling things up pretty nicely. So the last thing we need to do, just tidy up our type a little bit, primarily by getting rid of widows and orphans. And so widows and orphans are, a widow is all alone in the first column, and an orphan's all alone in the next column. All right, so let's see if we have any of those. This looks good. Here is a widow. This one single line of text belongs with this line, this text here. There's a couple of things we could do. We could push this over so they're all grouped together, or we could suck one line of type back into this column. So let's take a look. One of the easiest ways to do that is to sort of scan the text for a single word hanging out by itself, usually 4 to 5 letters, and you highlight that paragraph, and you come over to your character palette, and then you just squash it. You're squishing all the letters in that paragraph. 1%, 2%, 3%. So 90, they're all 97% less wide than they were. So here's a really important thing. Never go below 97%, because at any point below 97%, depending on the typeface, your readers are going to notice something's changed. They're going to think that the typeface is a different typeface entirely, because you've destroyed the integrity and the readability of the typeface, or legibility, by shrinking it. It's just a tool that we can use to help us flowing type a little bit better. If you don't go below 3%, there's no real optical variation. It's not large enough for people to notice. So that worked out pretty well. Now I've got 2 lines of type here, 2 lines here, no widows or orphans. Now what I can do is, there's only 2 small words on the end here, so I can select this paragraph, and I can kind of go the other direction. 101, 102, 103, 104. Now 104 is too big. Again, no more than 3%, so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go back to 100. I'm going to try to increase the word spacing. And there's 10, and if I go up 1%, then I got 3 words on the next line. That feels a little bit more balanced. I don't like to have 1 or 2 tiny words hanging off on the end. Like I don't even like test right here, but I might leave that just for the greater good. All right, looking down here, here is an orphan. So all alone on the next page, that's really bad. So we're going to take care of that. Now, when you're on the next page, it's hard to select and highlight. You can, but really the easiest thing to do is put your cursor there and hold the Shift key and kind of walk this way, and then it'll take you over and start selecting, holding the Shift key down. But now if I hold the Shift key in the left arrow, I'm selecting things with my arrows. And then I can hit the up arrow, and then that'll select it all. So I don't want that bit. All right, so there I have that paragraph selected. I can move down here, and I want to suck that little word up. So I'm going to do that here. 1%, 2%, 3%. Uh-oh. 4%. It's not going. 5%. That's too much. So then I'm going to maybe use a combo of condensing it, horizontal scaling, and maybe here I'm just going to decrease the word spacing a little. No, that didn't do it either. There we go. Okay, so I sucked that up. That's a bit extreme. If I put my cursor in there, 2% and -10, but sometimes you got to make those calls. All right, so now we don't have any widows and orphans, and everything looks very balanced. So that is the end of part 2. In part 3, we'll talk about folios, section headings. So that'll be a much shorter episode. See you then.